Hi, I'm Jackie Leader and welcome to Module 2, How to Write Concrete, Objective, Anecdotal Observations. We've already discussed how important observations are and some guidelines for writing observations. Now we're going to start looking at how to write objective observations. We've already learned why we assess children and how we should assess young children. We started talking about the authentic assessment process and why it's so important to use with young children. The whole assessment strategy is part of our curriculum process. Today, we're going to focus on one part of the process, observations. As we've learned from the audio and video lecture, recording observations is a skill that takes technique and practice. In the last video lecture, I listed some guidelines for writing observations. The last guideline was to write observations as objective and accurate as possible. So today, we're going to learn how to do that. First, we need to review an observation and think about what it tells us about the child. These are things we're going to analyze when we start interpreting the observations. So please read the following observations and we're going to look at some things about the child. What does this observation tell us about the child? What are your overall impressions of the child? What skills does the child have? And what skills need to be worked on? So here's the first observation. Donovan was hyperactive today. While building blocks with the other children, he was constantly knocking over the block structure on purpose and laughing. He then ran around the room wildly, shouting vroom, vroom, buzz, buzz, with his arms wide out, hitting a child as he passed by. Donovan is 4 years old. So let's think about what this observation told us about Donovan. What are your overall impressions of Donovan? Many people would say that he's impulsive. He has a hard time interacting with other children, and he's wild and destructive. When we look at the observation, what is it telling us developmentally about Donovan? When I look at his social development, it's saying he needs to work on the social skills while playing with other children. And he may need to learn some emotion regulation. He got very wild and excited at the end, and he might have a hard time calming down. So some skills that you might set for Donovan, based on the information from this observation, is how to play with other children, how to calm down, and also some concepts of empathy for other children. Now let's look at a different picture of Donovan. Donovan was playing in the block area for over 15 minutes today. He and the other children were stacking blocks on top of each other. He said 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 as he stacked 5 blocks on top of each other. Then he and another child counted 1, 2, 3 together and knocked over the blocks. They both laughed as the blocks fell down. They did this 3 or 4 times. Then Donovan said, "Let's be airplanes." He lifted his hands outward and began running around the block area going vroom, vroom, buzz, buzz. As he ran back into the block area, his arm hit another child. "Sorry," he said. Donovan is 4. Now, this observation paints a much different picture of Donovan, and our impressions are going to be different. In this observation, a lot of your overall impressions could be that he plays well with other children, and he uses good pro-social language such as sorry. This observation tells us developmentally that Donovan needs help with his counting skills. And he also needs some help in understanding where his body is within a physical space. Skills that we might set for Donovan based on this observation is how to count correctly up to 10. In the observation, he counted 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, so we know that he's having a difficult time with this. And also, we might help Donovan to be more aware of his physical body within the space. So, as you can see, these two observations paint a very different picture of Donovan, and they lead to different goals. What was the difference? The first one was written subjectively, and the second one was written accurately and objectively. So what does this mean? In a subjective observation, we're writing an observation that contains many personal biases, judgments, and labels. It tends to have our own interpretation of what's going on in the observation, and it could be very judgmental. Another issue is the information that's being written down and documented may not accurately be represented. We saw this in the case of Donovan, that he was building the blocks with another child. That information was left out, and it paints a different picture. Also, they didn't accurately document that he was counting the blocks as he stacked them. So here's an example of a subjective observation. Tracy's playing a math path game. She did really well and she enjoyed it. Well, how do I know that Tracy really liked the game? What do I consider really well in the path game, and does it match with what you consider doing really well in this game is? Our perspectives may not be the same, and it could lead to different goals. In contrast, an objective observation states just the facts. We're documenting the specific activities and behaviors we can observe without interpreting the behaviors. We'll be interpreting and analyzing what we see later, but we don't want to put that in the observation. We also want to document accurately what's being observed. In the example of Donovan, the first observation, we left out that Donovan and the other children were cooperatively knocking down the structures. This changes the behavior from a potential act of aggression to cooperative play. So here is an example of what the observation on Tracy might look like, written objectively and accurately. Tracy was playing a math path game. She rolled the dice and got a 2. She said, "I got a 2. She then randomly moved her game pieces 2 places, not in order. She had a smile on her face and said, "This is fun." So now we have a concrete example of what doing really good on the path game is. She recognized the number 2 and moved 2 spots. We also know that yes, she was having fun because she had a smile on her face and she stated, "This is fun." There are many words and phrases that make an observation subjective, and we want to stay away from these phrases. Laura J. Cochler developed a red flag word list that really helps us to know what things to leave out. These are categories that you cannot objectively observe, and we need to avoid them. The first one is feelings. We saw happy, sad, angry. These are things we're interpreting. But what we really want to do is see what's physically happening that may make us want to put that down. In the case of Tracy, she had a smile on her face. Another area we want to avoid is intelligences, such as dumb, smart, overachiever. These are things that we can't concretely observe, and they're also generalizations. We want to be specific in saying what's going on instead of saying that they are smart. We want to say they identified the number 2 on the dice. We also want to stay away from interpreting reasons that the child was doing something. For example, they did this on purpose, or they were determined. We don't need to label these, and we don't necessarily know the true intent. And the final thing we want to stay away from is self-concept things such as pretty, athletic. These are labels that I feel teachers put on to make them feel good about the child, but they're not offering us any developmental information, so we want to stay away from them. So let's look at some observations and analyze them. Today, Maggie and I worked on writing her name. She finally wrote an M. She got very excited to finally be able to make letters she can recognize. So what might be subjective or red flag in this observation? I've highlighted some words in red that are subjective words. She finally wrote an M. This is telling me that she's probably been working on this skill for a while, but we don't have a definitive answer for how long she's worked on it. She got very excited to finally be able to make letters she can recognize. She's probably doing something physically, like have a smile on her face. Maybe she's jumping up and down in her chair, or maybe she's saying, "Yippee, I did it." We want to do those specific behaviors instead of making the subjective words. Let's look at another one. Jay's doing really good and gets along with other kids good. He really likes the pickle he had for lunch. Now this is an observation one of my staff members wrote. And I believe she wrote it because she knew she hadn't written observations in a while and she wanted to do some documentation. But this is really an anecdotal observation. It's more of a summary of what happened during the week. Again, Jay's doing really good and gets along with other children good. What is her definition of really good, and does it compare to my definition of really good? You want to put specific information to be more concrete about what she's seeing. The second thing, he really liked his pickle he had for lunch. Now, as a parent, this is really important information if the first time I sent the pickle and I wanted to know if he liked it in his lunch. But it's being attached to an observation and they're out of context of each other. So you don't want to add extra things that doesn't make the observation relevant. Let's look at one more observation. Greg looks in the family book and turns to his page of his family and smiles. Then he turns to Miss Christina's family page and says, "Tina." Then he kisses the page. So what are some red flag words that we might want to take out of this one? If you're having a hard time figuring out, it's because it's a very good observation and there's really nothing I would change about this. I highlighted one thing on this page, and that's the name Tina. In the video lecture, we talked about making sure to use the exact words of the children. And in this case, Greg never called the teacher Christina, he always called her Tina. So by highlighting that, it gives us a clear example of his language development. So now that we have reviewed some objective and subjective observations, we're ready to look at the observations we write on our own. So our assignment for today is to submit the observation you made on a child into the discussion board. You're going to analyze your own observation, identifying any red flag words or phrases that you may have used in the observation. Then review 2 of your classmates' observation and offer feedback on how to improve. Finally, after receiving feedback from your peers, you're going to rewrite your observation to make it more accurate and objective. We'll be working more on this topic, and I look forward to reading your observations in the discussion board.